Marry me. $1 will cover it. Effie Renshaw set it on her knees in Front Street, in a black dress, 8 months old. The man she said it to had not eaten since Friday. His hat lay upside down between his boots. There was nothing in it. His voice came out cracked. "Ma'am, you have got the wrong man. I know what you are." Her head did not come up. "That is why I said $1. I have not got $1. You will." She reached into the dirt beside his hat. A silver coin came up out of it. Somebody had pitched it at him 3 days back and missed. He had never known it was lying there. She cleaned it on her sleeve. Then she took his hand and laid the coin flat in the palm. His fingers closed on it by themselves. She pushed a folded sheet of paper into his coat. "And in 3 days you will desert me. You will walk out of Hazen, and you will not come back." Front Street went quiet. A woman standing in the wagon ruts said the word out loud. Crazy. 3 days later, that same sheet of paper emptied the Shale County courthouse. If this is your first time here, take a second and subscribe. These are the stories the county history's left out, and there is a new one every week. Before this one goes any further, what would $1 have bought? Where you grew up? Leave it in the comments. Now, back to Front Street. The dollar was not the strange part. Front Street had watched stranger things change hands. The strange part was the woman. 8 months earlier, Effie Renshaw had been the wife of the man who kept the county seed warehouse. Nobody in Hazen would have put her name in the same sentence as the word beggar. There were 2 measures in that warehouse. Only one of them was honest. The man who worked that out did not live to see the month turn. Tobias Renshaw had kept the county seed warehouse for 6 years. People in Hazen said he was built like a rule, the wooden kind, the kind that does not bend to be polite. He never took a handful of anything that was not his, and he never went home before the book was shut. The seed loan had started after the dry years. The county sold bonds and bought winter wheat, and it went out to any family that would put a mark on the page. So many bushels in September, the same bushels back after harvest, and 1/10 on top for the county's trouble. 2 measures did the work. One to pour it out, one to take it back. They came off the same oak, same height, same width, same iron band. Both of them carried the county sealer's brand burned into the side. Effie remembered the lamp on the table those last months. He set both measures on the boards and ran a caliper across the inside of each. He wrote the numbers down. He did it again the next night and the night after, like a man checking whether he had gone crazy. "It is a 1/2 inch, he said once. "That is all it is." A 1/2 inch of what? Of nothing at all. He shut the book. Across the inside, which comes to 4.5 pounds of wheat on every bushel a man pays back. She had not understood what she was hearing. She only remembered that he did not put the book on the shelf. He carried it into the other room with him. Another night, he said a thing she thought about for the rest of her life. A warehouse without somebody who can measure is not a warehouse. It is a place to keep the thief in out of the weather. On a Tuesday night in October, they found him in the warehouse doorway. The coroner came out in the morning and was done before noon. Fell in the dark. Been drinking. Cold night, and the man never got up. Tobias Renshaw had never taken a drink in his life. Everybody in Hazen knew it. His wife had been married to him 11 years and had never smelled it on him once. The inquest was written out in a clean hand, signed and filed. Nobody asked a second question. The man who wrote it was the man who would have had to ask. Alton Renshaw came for the warehouse keys before his brother was 3 days in the ground. He was the older one, 400 acres east of town, and a gold chain across his vest. He came in without knocking and kept his hat on. "I will take the keys, Effie. They are county keys. They are Renshaw keys. He put out his hand and left it out. A woman on her own, holding keys, makes a town talk. You will thank me. She gave him the keys. In November, he took the 80 acres of wheat ground. In January, he took the front bedroom, because Cordelia said the light was better for her eyes. In February, he moved Effie's bed out to the summer kitchen off the barn. It was a room built for canning in August. Snow came under the door and lay in a thin white line until noon. In the warm months, the mice ran over her feet at night, and she learned not to move when they did. She did not fight any of it. She thought that was what a widow did, and that if she stayed small enough, the thing would stop short of the bottom. What she did not know was that Alton was talking. He said it kindly, which is how that kind of thing gets said. He said it to the men at the mill and the deacons, and anybody who asked after her. She has not been right since the funeral. She will not come to church. She keeps to that back room, and she will not eat with us. Every one of those things was true. He had made them true himself. She took one thing with her when they moved her out. It was her husband's toolbox, a plain pine box with a rope handle. Alton had lifted the lid, seen 2 worn coats and a folding rule, and 3 broken pencils, and walked right past it. You want that? Take it. It is not worth the hauling. She carried it across the yard herself, and it was heavier than it had any business being. 2 coats and a rule. She thought about that for as long as it took to cross the yard. Then she set it in the corner and stopped thinking about it for 8 months. There was one more thing about Effie. Renshaw and Alton had never bothered to learn it. She could read and she could figure. She had learned it at 16 at her father's elbow, while he worked the store accounts. He let her stay if she stayed quiet. He used to say she had a head for it. The way a man says a thing he does not expect to matter. On Saturday night, she heard her name through the wall. The summer kitchen shared a board wall with the wash house. The wash house door stood open on the yard. Alton had never once thought about how thin a partition is. The doctor has signed it. That was Alton. It only wants filing. He never even looked at her. That was Cordelia. He does not have to look at her. He has to write it down. A chair moved. Thursday morning. Judge Fisk sits at 9. Effie stood in the dark with her hand flat on the boards. What happens Thursday? Thursday, I am made her guardian. He said it like a man reading off a feed bill. After that, I sign what she would sign. The place goes to Dutton for $1,900. It is already drawn. And her? Topeka. There was a pause on the other side of the wall. The pause was worse than the word. That is 140 miles, Alton. It is 140 miles, he agreed. Effie did not sleep. She stood there until her hand went numb against the boards. Then she sat down and worked out what she had just been told. Thursday, they would stand her in front of a judge and say she was not right in the head. After that, her name did not belong to her. Somebody else would write it, sell the place, and put her on a train. There is no coming back from the state asylum at Topeka. There is nobody left withstanding to come and get you. It was Monday morning. Thursday was 3 days off. She lit the lamp before dawn, got the toolbox open, and took out her husband's book. He had bought it himself and had never used it for anything but the warehouse. She turned it to the back, past all the columns. The last leaf had nothing on it, but 4 lines in his hand, where he had started something and stopped. She tore that leaf out along the stitching. Her hands were not steady. The ink jumped twice and left 2 black stars on the page. But she pressed every letter down, hard and square, the way her father had taught her. A thing written badly is a thing somebody can argue with. She wrote out a contract of marriage. She left the man's name blank. Then she folded it into her dress and walked into town, while the light was still gray. She was not going to take just anybody. She wanted a man who was not from Shale County, because a man from Shale County has a cousin. She wanted a man with nothing, because a man with something can be leaned on. She wanted a man who could be gone by the weekend and never be found. There had been a fellow against the feed store wall for 3 days. Nobody knew him. Nobody had given him anything but a coin thrown badly. She stopped in front of him and went down on her knees in the road. There was a part of that morning nobody in Shale County ever told the same way twice. Word got up the street faster than she did. She was still on her knees when the shouting started down by the bank. The crowd came apart. Alton Renshaw came through it with his hat in his fist, and his face red to the collar. "You crazy." His hand went out for her hair. It stopped in the air because she was standing up. She had got her feet under her and squared around to face him. It was the first time in 8 months she had lifted her head to anybody. "Alton, what have you done?" "I got married." Her voice was not loud. It carried to the end of the street anyway, in front of 40 people. The fee was $1. The contract is in that man's coat. Alton's head swung around to the feed store wall. The man in the ragged coat sat in the dirt with one hand shut on a coin. The other hand lay flat over his chest. "That is a scrap of paper. It is a contract of marriage. Give it here." He started for the wall. She stepped in front of him. A woman in a black dress got in the way of a man, twice her size, in the middle of Front Street, and the crowd stopped breathing. "Alton." She did not raise her voice at all. "You filed a paper at 9 o'clock this morning." His face changed. "You mean to have me put away and sign my name for me?" She said it the way you read off a list. "Judge Fisk, on Thursday. The place to Dutton for 1900. Then Topeka." "How did you—" "That wall is 1 board thick. In the winter, the snow comes through it. At night, your voice comes through it." The street had gone very still. "So I will ask you a thing." She took 1 step. "A man cannot be made guardian of another man's wife. There is no such filing. Nobody has ever made one." She let that sit. "So what is it you put in front of Judge Fisk this morning? Is that a petition, or is that a theft?" Nobody said anything. There was a dog barking behind the livery, and that was all. Then an old man near the front worked it out loud. His name was Ozias Pell. He made harness, and he had sat on a federal jury once when he was young, which in Hazen made him a lawyer. "She ain't crazy." Pell said it slowly, like a man reading a sum off a slate. "She got married first. You can't put away a woman that's already got a husband. That's her husband. That's the whole of it." It went through the crowd sideways. Married first. Married first. The women who had called her mad an hour ago were holding each other's sleeves and leaning in. Alton Renshaw stood there with his hat crushed in his hand. "That paper is a fake." He got it out through his teeth. "No blessing, no license, and no name on it worth a damn. Thursday, I will have it burned in front of you. And that tramp goes up for enticing away a married woman." He shoved back through the crowd and spat in the dirt. "You will see who the clerk of this county is." That last part was true. Merrick Choate had been clerk of Shale County for 11 years. He had been drinking with Alton Renshaw for 10 of them. She had to go with him now. A wife goes where her husband goes, and 40 people had watched her say so. Bertie Stoll kept the boarding house by the depot and had known Effie since they were girls. She had heard every word before they got to the door. She brought out 2 plates and did not ask 1 question. She only took Effie's hand and squeezed it hard, once, and let go. The man ate slowly. Effie watched him out of the side of her eye, and she could not make it come right. A man who has not eaten since Friday picks up the plate. He gets it down so fast. He does not taste it. And then he coughs half of it back up. She had seen it at the church door in the dry years. This one stirred it. He blew on the spoon. He waited. His hands were black to the wrist, and there was dirt under every nail. There was not one callus on either palm. Not a hoe, not a fork, not an axe. That night he pulled his boots off at the door. The laces went twice around the ankle and knotted in the front. That is not how a man ties a boot to walk in. That is how a man ties a boot so it will not come apart on a horse. The inside of both trouser legs was worn shiny from the knee down. A tramp walks. He does not ride. She put the boots back and said nothing about it. She did not need to know who he was. She needed 3 days. He went out at midnight and came back before the roosters. She got up in the gray light and looked at the boots again. There was chaff on them. Wheat chaff, ground fine, the kind that comes off a floor, where grain has been moved for weeks. There was exactly one place in Shale County with chaff on the floor. He did the same the second night, and the third. She still did not ask him. But on the second night, waiting for the door, she dragged her husband's toolbox out of the corner and opened it. When people are frightened, they put their hands on what the dead left behind. 2 coats, a folding rule, a caliper, 3 broken pencils. She had been through that box a dozen times in 8 months. She took everything out and looked down into the empty box. Then she stopped. The box was too shallow. From the outside, it came up past her knee. From the inside, her hand hit bottom at the wrist. She picked up one of the broken pencils and worked the point into the corner of the bottom board. Once, twice. The third time the wood came up, stiff and dry, with a sound like a knuckle cracking. There was a false bottom in it. Under the false bottom, there was paper. It was folded and folded again and pressed flat. She got it out with both hands, and it crackled, and she was afraid of tearing it. She spread it under the lamp. It was her husband's hand. She would have known it blind. He pressed the end of every stroke down before he lifted the pen. He put a small dot beside his own name every time he wrote it. There were dates. There were measures. There were quantities, and there were names. October 2nd. Measure going out, 13½ inches inside. Measure coming back, 14 inches inside. Book says the same measure. October 9th. Buchanan. 40 bushels out, 44 back. Weighed it myself on the platform scale. 2,830 pounds. 44 bushels is 2,640. And at the bottom, in a smaller hand, 2 lines that were not part of any column. Choate offered me the North 40 if I would let the measures ride. I told him no. Since I told him no, I do not care for the walk home. 3 days after that line was written, Tobias Renshaw was found in the warehouse doorway with the cold on him. She did not hear the door. Effie. She had the sheets spread on the floor under the lamp, and she got them behind her back before she had decided to. Then she stopped. She thought about it, and she brought them out again and laid them flat where he could see. Look at it. He came in and went down on one knee on the boards. His eyes went along the columns. Dates, measures, quantities, names. Top to bottom, fast, and he did not miss a line. Those were not a tramp's eyes. My husband wrote that. The measure that pours out and the measure that takes back are not the same measure. Half an inch across the inside. He said nothing at all. He could not take a drink. The county wrote down that he was drunk. The man who held that pen was sitting in this kitchen this afternoon. He got up off his knee. Do not keep that in this house tonight. Where then? Somewhere you know. He was already at the door. Somewhere I do not know, and they do not know. He stopped in the frame with his back to her. Come to the courthouse tomorrow. Do not be late. That night, the sheets went into the gap behind the brick, at the back of Bertie Stoll's kitchen range. Effie had hidden her first letter in that gap at 16. There was not another living soul who knew it was there. A wife in that house did not sit still, and Effie did not want to. She carried water from the pump every morning. She scrubbed pots. She sat in the church basement on Wednesday with the ladies' aid and topped beans. She stood in line at the back door of Dowd's store, where the women bring eggs and butter to be put against the account. Nobody thought a thing of it. Half the town felt sorry for her, and the other half wanted to look at her. And the whole time they talked. 40 out and 44 back, and it was not 44. The one they take it back with is fatter on the inside. I put my hand in both of them. Ruby said her man was 200 pounds short and could not prove a thing. An old woman at the pump set down her bucket and made two shapes with her hands, one narrow and one wide. Pouring measure, taking measure. Same brand on the side of both. Did anybody ever say so? The women went quiet then, and one of them looked at the house. Rufus Stoll had said so, once, out loud, in the street, the fall before. 3 days in the county jail for disturbing the peace. Since he came home, he leaves the room if anybody says the word measure. The man in the ragged coat sat under the elm by the feed store all day and got nothing at all. Nobody tells a tramp anything. That night, 3 men came around the back of the boarding house with whiskey in them. One was Coy Bledsoe, and he had a handout before he was across the yard. That's the dollar woman. Do not touch me. $1. Bledsoe grinned back at the other two. Hell, I'll go too. Effie did not step back. Then let us talk about the price. She said it as evenly as if she were reading eggs off a slate. Strike me, and you owe my husband $1. That is the whole of the damage. Listen to it talk. But taking me is a different figure. She stepped toward him instead of away, carrying off a married woman against her will. In this state, that is a felony. Do you know the term for it? Because I do. Bledsoe's hand stayed up in the air, doing nothing. So there are your two prices. $1, or you're back for a number of years. She looked at it. Which one is cheaper? One of the men behind him laughed. Then they all went, the way men go when the joke is turned around on them. Effie shut the door and put her shaking hands in her apron and held them still. When she looked up, the man in the ragged coat was watching her from the corner of the kitchen. It was not a tramp's face. Merrick Choate came to the boarding house on Wednesday afternoon. He came in the front with 2 deputies behind him, his hat in his hand and his sleeve garters showing. He sat on the edge of the kitchen bench like a man visiting a sick relation. 11 years I have been clerk of this county. He was smiling. I have never had a hearing like tomorrow's. That is my business, Mr. Choate. It is. It surely is. He leaned in and dropped his voice. So do not come tomorrow. She looked up. If you are not in the room, the paper falls of its own weight. I will talk to Alton. You get the wheat ground back and the front bedroom back, and no more is said about Topeka. That is generous. It is not generous. I do not care for noise. He was still smiling. His eyes had nothing in them at all. A quiet county is a quiet warehouse, and a quiet warehouse is quiet people. You know that, Mrs. Renshaw. The cold went up her back and sat between her shoulders. He was not talking about wheat ground. Mr. Choate. She kept her hands flat on the table. Were you at the warehouse the night my husband died? The smile came off his face slowly, the way frost goes off a window. Neither deputy moved. One of them looked at the floor. Choate stood, put his hat on, and got it square. Come to the courthouse tomorrow. He said it at the door. And it will not be only that tramp who is sorry about it. The door shut. Effie sat where she was for a long time, with her fingers going cold. When she turned around, the man in the ragged coat was standing in the shadow of the kitchen door. She had no idea how long he had been there. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the door Choate had gone out of. Nobody in that courtroom knew what was under the floor of a dead man's toolbox. Everything after that Thursday turned on it. They filled the room by 8:30. They stood along the back wall and out into the hall. There were boys up in the window ledges with their heels knocking the plaster. Judge Pomeroy Fisk had been on the bench 2 years. He did not know one end of the county from the other. He sat up there and fanned himself. Alton went first and did not take long. Then Merrick Choate stepped out in front of the bench with a paper in his hand. The woman claims a marriage. The contract names one Ellis Roan. He turned so the room could hear him. I have spent a day and a half on it. There is no Ellis Roan in the census. There is none on the assessor's roll. There is none in this county or in Barton or in Rice. He let it hang. There is no such man in the state of Kansas. Somebody in the back said, "Oh," out loud. A marriage to a man who does not exist is not a marriage. A paper got up to block a lawful filing is a fraud. He turned back to the bench. I would ask the court to burn it and send her home to her family. Judge Fisk shut his fan. That will do. Burn it. It was too easy. It went past so fast that half the room did not understand it had happened. A deputy came across the boards and pulled the folded contract out of the front of her dress. She let him. There were 40 men between her and the door. Choate took it and walked to the stove at the end of the room. Effie watched him go. She watched him stop. She watched him turn the paper over once in his fingers. And he did not burn it. He stood there for the length of a breath. Then he put it inside his coat, buttoned the coat over it, and came back. She felt the whole shape of the room change. He could have burned it. It was 2 feet from the fire, and the court had just told him to. He put it against his chest instead. Nobody else in that room saw it. Everybody was looking at the judge. Your Honor? Her voice came out steadier than she expected. May I say a thing? You may go home. She did not move. Then I will say it here. My husband could not take a drink. Choate turned around fast. Sit her down. He never took one in his life, and this county knows it. The paper that says he was drunk in that doorway was written by a man in this room. The gavel came down twice. Contempt of court. One night in the county jail. They took her out through the side door with her arms behind her, and the sleeve of her dress tore at the shoulder. The crowd made a noise like water going over a dam, and the deputies pushed them back with the flat of their hands. Let us stop there for 1 second. I would like to know where you are listening from tonight. The town, the county, whatever you care to put down. Leave it below, and I will read them. Now, let us get back to it. The county jail was one room with a dirt floor and old straw in it. Effie sat with her back to the wall, and her torn sleeve hanging off her shoulder. Toward evening, a shadow came up outside the bars. Come to your senses yet? Alton put his face to the window. He had the look of a man who has already won, and is enjoying the last of it. That husband of yours is gone. Went out the south road before light. The gatekeeper saw him. He laughed. $1 in his pocket and no whipping coming. That is people for you. She did not answer. Tomorrow it is finished, and Thursday week you go to Topeka. 140 miles. You settle in, and you forget this county ever. Alton. It was the first thing she had said, and it stopped him. What am I to forget? His mouth shut. The place is $1,900. She was still on the floor. She said it the way you read a column. You have 400 acres east of town and a gold chain on your vest. A man with 400 acres does not put his brother's wife away for $1,900. You shut your mouth. So it is not the money. What is it then? Alton Renshaw's face came apart. Shut it, and sit quiet. He went 2 steps and stopped, and stood with his back to her. Then he said the truest thing he had said in 8 months. Effie, your husband was a straight man. That is what killed him. A wagon went by out on the street. Do not you be one too. His boots went away up the alley. She sat a long time after that, working it back the other way. It had never been the $1,900. It had never even been the wheat. 900 bushels a year is a great deal of grain, but a man does not put a woman on a train over grain. He was not selling her. He was moving her. And if a paper ever came out of a dead man's toolbox and got read out in a courtroom, then what was written on it was not stealing. It was the other thing. And the pen that wrote drunk on her husband belonged to Merrick Choate. The dark came into the jail and sat down with her. She had been alone for 8 months. She was alone tonight. Tomorrow she would be alone in front of the whole county. The man had not even waited out the 3 days. She had told him to leave her on Thursday, and he had gone on Wednesday, and there was nothing in that she had not asked for. She did not cry. She sat with her knees up and thought about a gap behind a brick at the back of a kitchen range. Nobody knew. Not Choate, not Alton, not the man in the ragged coat, because she had never told him where she put it. Tomorrow, they would drag her into that courtroom. She was going to say it out loud with the whole county listening. A thing said in front of 400 people cannot be unsaid by one clerk with a stove. She must have slept because something woke her. It was the hour when the roosters are thinking about it and have not started. Somebody was walking down the alley on the far side of the wall, unhurried. Effie turned her head. There was a gap of 4 inches under the barred window, where the wall met the ground. Through it, at the level of her eyes, she could see boots. The laces went twice around the ankle and knotted in the front. She lay still until the sound was gone. Then she put her forehead down on her arms, and for the first time since October, she felt something in her chest that was not a stone. The dollar was the smallest thing in it. It was also the part the county remembered longest. By 8 in the morning, there were twice as many people at the courthouse as the day before. There were wagons in from the north end and faces nobody in Hazen knew. A thing about a measure had got over the county line in the night. They brought her out with her sleeve hanging and the jail dirt all over her. She did not bend. Look at her eye, Ozias Pell said to nobody. Judge Fisk took the bench. Merrick Choate stood up beside him with a pen in his hand. The court found yesterday. The paper is void, and the woman goes home to her family. For the contempt, I would ask 30 days added, and that she be removed from the room. So ordered. It is behind the brick. She said it loud. It went out over their heads and hit the back wall, and the room stopped dead. Behind the brick at the back of the kitchen range at Stoll's boarding house. She had turned to face the room, not the bench. What my husband left is in that gap. I am saying it in front of this whole county, so nobody has to take my word for it. Choate's pen had stopped moving. Send somebody. She was looking straight at him. Send a deputy this minute. It is 400 yards. If there is nothing behind that brick, then I have lied to this court, and you may do what you like with me. Stop her mouth. Why will you not send? A deputy started for her. If you are in the right, Mr. Choate, that gap is the best friend you have got this morning. The hand came over her mouth. The room came up like water. Men pushed in from the back. The deputies pushed them out with their staves. And the boys on the window ledges were screaming. Judge Fisk was on his feet, hammering the bench with nothing much behind it. And through all of it, Merrick Choate stood absolutely still, with his hand flat against the front of his coat. Which was the answer? Half the room understood it. That paper is behind the brick or it ain't, so go look. Tobias Renshaw never took a drink in his life. Send a man! Send a man! Choate turned and said something low into the judge's ear. Fisk's face went white, then red, and he came up out of the chair. This court is. You don't need to send anybody. It was not a shout. It was not even loud. But the whole room went quiet on it, all at once. The way a field goes quiet when the wind drops. Nobody in that room had ever seen what the man in the ragged coat kept against his chest. The crowd came apart at the main doors, and he walked in through the gap. He had not changed a thing. Same hair in his eyes, same coat, the color of dirt or ash, same boots with the laces twice around and knotted in the front. Only he was not bent over anymore. That's him! Alton was pointing with his whole arm. That is the man who enticed her away, Judge, and I ask that he be taken. I have seen that paper already. The man did not stop walking. I read every line of it Tuesday night by lamplight, and I watched you take wheat out the back door of that warehouse. 3 nights running, Mr. Choate, while the town was asleep. Choate came down off the step. Arrest him. He is a vagrant, and I want him in irons. The deputies closed in with their stabs out. The man stopped. He put his hand inside the ragged coat. Effie thought it was the contract. That was where he had kept his hand flat all week. What came out was not paper. It was a piece of brass on a worn strap, the size of a palm, dulled, almost black. There was a 5-pointed star cut into a circle. The first man in that room to understand it was Ozias Pell, who had sat on a federal jury 40 years before. He sat straight down on the floor where he stood. That's a federal badge. It crossed the room in 2 seconds. The staves came down. One deputy put a knee on the boards, and then they all did. Judge Fisk came off that bench so fast, he left his fan behind him. Deputy United States Marshal. He held it up so the back wall could see. As of this minute, this is a federal matter. Alton Renshaw stood with his arms still out in the air. Choate had gone backward 2 steps. It is a fake. He picked that up somewhere. Mr. Choate, take the paper out of your coat. Choate's hand went to his chest before he could stop it. You could have burned that yesterday. The court told you to. You were standing 2 feet from the stove. He came another step. You kept it because you meant to use it. Proof the woman forged a name. He put out his hand. Only you never asked whose name it was. Ellis Roan. He said it to the whole room. That name is written on my commission. It is sealed with the Federal District Court at Topeka. It is in no census in this state and on no roll in any county in Kansas. Mr. Choate spent a day and a half proving it, which is exactly right. It cannot be. That is the point of it. Choate's mouth was open. So what you have buttoned inside your coat is a United States Marshal's contract of marriage, and the woman named on it is his wife. The knees went out from under Merrick Choate. The paper came loose and slid down the front of his coat, turned over once, and landed face up in the dust. And one more thing, the marshal did not pick it up. You have hunted that ledger for 8 months. She wrote that contract on the last leaf of it. You have been carrying a page of Tobias Renshaw's book over your heart since yesterday morning. Somebody near the front turned the sheet with the toe of his boot. There was writing on the back, 4 lines in a dead man's hand, every stroke pressed down at the end. Alton went down on his face on the boards. I never knew anything, sir. I only meant to bring my brother's wife home. You filed the petition. The marshal did not look down. If you had left it alone, I would still be under that elm tree with my hat between my boots. You opened this yourself. Now stand up and finish it." Then Effie stepped forward, and the deputy holding her arm let go. "Sir, may I ask for something?" "Ask." "Send for the 2 measures at the warehouse. The one they pour with in September, and the one they take back with after harvest." They put them down side by side in the middle of the courtroom floor. They looked exactly the same oak, the same iron band, the same brand burned into the side by the county sealer. Effie knelt on the boards between them and put her hand into the first. "This is the measure that goes out. Run your finger down the inside. It is straight." She put her hand into the other. "This is the measure that comes back. The inside wall bows outward." She looked up. 1/2 inch across. The room did not make a sound. 1/2 inch is 4.5 pounds of wheat. On every bushel, a man pays back. A family that borrowed 40 bushels loses 200 pounds they never owed. That is 3 months of bread. She got to her feet. This county pays back about 12,000 bushels a year. 900 of them go somewhere that is not the warehouse. And these measures have been in use 4 years. The number went around the room and came back. 3,600 bushels, a man said. "Where did it go?" "We went hungry." My husband measured it. Her voice shook and did not stop. "Every night. The inside of both, and the weight off the platform scale, and what the book said, side by side." Then he was called in and offered the North 40 to let it be. She turned and looked at Merrick Choate on the floor. He said no, and he wrote down that after he said no, he did not care for the walk home. 3 days later, a man who never took a drink in his life was found in that doorway, drunk. Choate broke. He went face down, and the names came out of him in a rush. The clerk in the next county, 2 men on the county board, the buyer at Great Bend who took the wheat off the wagons and asked nothing. Alton screamed at him to shut up. "Shut up! Shut up!" Choate came up on his elbows. "You filed it. Nobody was looking at anything until you filed it." And the 2 of them got hold of each other's collars and rolled in the dust like boys. The laugh started with 1 man, then 10, then the whole room, and the boys on the window ledges drumming their heels. Effie did not laugh. She was on her knees between the 2 measures, with her hands in her lap. 8 months. The keys, then the wheat ground, then the front bedroom. The snow under the door and a thin white line. The mice over her feet. 8 months of carrying that box across the yard and thinking. It was heavy for 2 coats and a rule. Her shoulders went. She cried for the first time since October, quietly, beside a wooden measure. The marshal got down on 1 knee in the dust, so his face was level with hers. "Mrs. Renshaw," she looked up. "Your husband was not a drunk." He said it so the back wall could hear it. "The inquest gets written again today, and it gets read out in front of this county." They opened the warehouse the following Tuesday. The bar came out, both doors swung wide, and the smell of wheat came over the yard. The line went back past the depot. Men with hand carts, women with sacks, children hanging onto the backs of skirts. 3,600 bushels went back out of that building, measured with the honest measure, and nothing else. They went through 4 years of the county book and found every household that had paid short. The other measure they took out onto the courthouse lawn, split with an axe, and put on a fire. The whole county stood around and watched it burn. The children clapped. Merrick Choate went to the federal jail at Topeka, and the names he gave up turned the state capitol over for a month. Alton Renshaw was convicted of conspiracy to defraud. The wheat ground came back, and the front bedroom, and the keys. The inquest was written a second time and nailed to the courthouse door, where the first had hung. Tobias Renshaw. Death by violence. No liquor found in him. Rufus Stoll stood in front of that paper a long while. Then he took his hat off. Cordelia Renshaw caught Effie's skirt at the gate. "Effie, please, my husband." Effie did not pull away. "You never once came out to his grave. There was no heat in it at all. Come Sunday, I will bring the flowers. You only have to stand there." The marshal left on Thursday. The night before, there was one lamp lit in the back room at Stoll's. He put the contract on the table in front of her. It had been in the dirt and inside a clerk's coat and back again. The corner was folded and there was a stain across it. Every letter she had pressed down was still readable. "Burn it." He pushed it an inch toward her. "While that exists, you are married to a man who is leaving." She picked it up. The lamp was right there. It would have taken a second. She put her hand back down. No. Why? Because this is what saved him. She folded it once. "Without this, I am 140 miles from here. The box rots in Alton's shed. Tobias stays a drunk in the county book forever, and that measure is still in the warehouse this morning." She put the folded paper inside her dress. $1 worth of paper opened this county. "I am not going to burn it." He looked at her a while. The wick went down and the room got darker by degrees. "I sat outside that feed store 17 days. He said it almost to himself. "Nobody tells a tramp anything. I cannot go to the pump. I cannot go into the church kitchen. I cannot stand at the back door of Dowd's where the women trade eggs." He looked up. "You had all of it in 3. I carried water. That is the job." He almost smiled. "That is the whole job. I just cannot get in the door." He shook his head. "You turned a county over with $1. $1 bought me 3 days." She was watching the lamp. "What turned it over is that people talk in front of a woman carrying water. They always have. Nobody ever thought that was worth anything." She looked at her hands, "Including me." He stood up. "You asked my name once." "I did. Ellis Roan is what is on the commission." He stopped in the doorway. "Harlan Dawes is the rest of the time." "Mr. Dawes, I have the whole state to ride. If this county was in this shape, the next one is too." He had his back half turned. "And in every one of them, I still cannot get in the door." He looked back at her. "I never did desert you." Her hand went to the front of her dress, to the folded paper. "Then don't." Effie Renshaw said it to the lamp. "I come cheap. I am easy to buy back." In the spring of the next year, Shale County took on a new weigher and sealer of measures. The county had petitioned for it. They wanted somebody who knew how to measure, they said, and 41 men signed it. The person who took the post was a woman. There had never been a woman in that office in the state of Kansas. But the recommendation from the district court carried a United States Marshal's signature, and nobody found anything to say. Every September and every July, she set the 2 measures, side by side, in the open doorway, in daylight, where anybody walking past could see. She ran the caliper across the inside of each and wrote the numbers in the book. It was exactly what her husband had done. She simply did not have to do it at night. There was a framed sheet of paper on the wall inside the warehouse door, and a silver dollar nailed up beside it. A child asked her about it once. "Ma'am, what's that?" "That," Effie said, "is the key to this warehouse." And once in a while, not often, there was a man in a bad coat sitting under the elm by the feed store. Nobody in Hazen ever placed him. But on those days, Bertie Stoll set out 2 plates without being asked. One for the stranger, and one for the woman who came down from the warehouse, still untying her apron. That is the story of Effie Renshaw and $1 she dug out of the road. I would like to know what you would have done with 3 days and $1, and nobody on your side. Tell me below. If this one was worth your evening, leave a like so the next person finds it. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next one.